I think we've proven ourselves to be a trusted and reliable partner, even as we address immediate shocks. Our commitment to the long-term inclusive development of the country remains steadfast. I think you all have in front of you our 2024 country results report. This marks the 50th anniversary of our work here in this country, which we also celebrated this year. And in 2024, we delivered $215 million in development programming, and it's outlined in the report. But just to give you some of the headlines, $72 million was provided to support universal health care coverage and maternal and primary health care. Close to $40 million went to climate action and resilience. 30 million supported economic development, governance, and gender equality programs. So we have 22 active joint programs. That's really where the UN works with different programs and with different partners. And there's more programs in Bangladesh than any other Asia-Pacific country. Bangladesh is a regional leader in UN coherence and integrated support. So a lot to be proud of. We champion an integrated approach to sustainable development, focusing on climate resilience, economic transformation, and demographic change. We're looking at green transition, clean energy investments, sustainable urban development, unlocking climate finance through the integrated national financing framework. So a lot of the details are in the report that we've shared with you in case you're interested in going through. Human development is, of course, central to our mission. We support government leadership in health, education, and social protection, while prioritizing gender equality as both a right and a driver of progress. We also support national migration policies, strengthening data systems and services for internal and cross-border migrants. And this is another area of work I think that's been really focused on and reinforced by the interim government. Aligned with Bangladesh's economic transformation goals, the UN has supported labour market reforms as well. Our Advancing Decent Work initiative equips young people with future-ready skills and promotes workforce inclusion for persons with disability and marginalised groups. We've also launched an employment injury scheme for garment workers, now covering community-related injuries, providing safety nets for thousands of families. Reintegration support for returning migrants has expanded through migrant welfare services, offering holistic services, and there's a lot of focus as well on women returning. These efforts are all interconnected. Economic transformation must be inclusive and climate smart. Gender equality must underpin all policies, and human development must be rooted in rights, equality, and dignity. You all know that Bangladesh is one of the most climate-affected countries. We've also mobilized $45 million for disaster response last year, reaching 1.7 million people with food, healthcare, water, sanitation, livelihoods, and shelter. In May, we approved $10 million for anticipatory action to support communities before floods and cyclones. So that means if there's floods in the river basins this year, we'll be able to provide assistance to families so that they can, before the flood arrives, so that they can protect themselves, they can protect their livelihoods, their animals, and their belongings. So this is something that it's the biggest anticipatory action framework in the world, and I think Bangladesh is again a leader on that front. You mentioned Rohingya response. It remains a huge challenge, a critical challenge, and Professor Yunus and I spoke about it yesterday. Over 1 million refugees continue to live in Cox's Bazar. Under the government leadership, the UN and our partners continue to provide life-saving support. Last year, we mobilized $549 million under the Joint Response Plan for refugees and host communities. However, this year we're expecting funding to drop significantly. It already has. This is not a Bangladesh issue. This is a global issue that we're facing across the world. We are working with government, the NGOs, to provide life-saving assistance, including food, healthcare, shelter, and protection. But we have to prioritize some of that support, given the drops in financing that we're facing. But the big worry is also the fact that the humanitarian situation in Rakhine continues to worsen. It's not getting any better. So just to commend, and it's really important to re-emphasize this, Bangladesh's generosity as a host community. It's something that we continue to reiterate and reaffirm. Our support to Bangladesh, our commitment to a rights-based, solutions-oriented humanitarian support. We aim to better equip the Rohingya for early, voluntary and sustainable and safe return to Myanmar when conditions allow. But right now the conditions are very challenging. Looking ahead, the UN and Bangladesh remains committed to being a principled, effective and responsive partner. Our 2025 priorities include overall, and I'm going back to the broader development priorities in Bangladesh, supporting smooth transition strategy for LDC graduation, strengthening national institutions through reform commissions, scaling climate financing and inclusive green development, supporting preparations for a free, fair and credible elections, accelerating gender equality and social justice, mobilizing innovative finance for the SDGs through public-private partnerships. You also mentioned that last week we marked UN Peacekeepers Day in Dhaka. Bangladesh is the third largest contributor to UN peacekeeping, with over 200,000 personnel deployed since 1988. Today, 5,818 Bangladeshi peacekeepers serve in 10 missions worldwide. We really and deeply appreciate Bangladesh's commitment to peacekeeping and human rights. Echoing the Secretary-General, I also would like to say that we honour the dedication and the sacrifices as well of Bangladeshi peacekeepers serving in some of the world's most challenging environments, from Somalia to the Democratic Republic of Congo, Liberia to Sudan. For the UN overall, it's also been a challenging year. In 2024, it marked the launch of the UN 80 initiative, a bold vision to revitalize the UN and make it more fit for purpose. It reaffirms the importance of multilateralism and collective action, and Bangladesh is a stalwart upholder of multilateralism. This initiative aims to strengthen the UN's three pillars: peace and security, human rights and development, but really has a lot of focus around efficiency and effectiveness. In Bangladesh, we're also contributing to this vision. We've now moved into one UN house in Gulshan, one UN premises, saving about $1.5 million and providing coherence and greater collaboration to better support Bangladesh. We're proud to be one of the earlier adopters of this model in the region. As I mentioned already, this week I met with the Chief Advisor, Professor Yunus, and reaffirmed the UN's commitment to human and economic development, governance, human rights and gender equality. I reiterated our support for the Rohingya response, especially ahead of the high-level conference in September. In the face of the complexity and this moment in Bangladesh, the UN stands for human dignity and rights. We pledge to support the shared promise of peace, prosperity, and sustainability for everybody living in the country. Thank you all. Done the bad. I'll stop here. Okay. So on the humanitarian corridor question, I think I've issued several comments and statements on this already. But a humanitarian corridor is quite a formal legal issue, and it requires agreement between sovereign states. So it requires the government of Bangladesh and the Myanmar counterparts and potentially any other groups that are involved to agree formally. If there's an agreement, the UN can support, but that agreement, as I understand it, has not been established as yet. So I think any initiative to improve cross-border relations, any initiative to support people that are impacted by the conflict in Myanmar is very welcome and very supported by the UN. But there is no humanitarian corridor in place as such, and we haven't been involved in discussions to establish such a corridor. So I just want to clarify that it really is between governments. It's something that we can support once it's established, but there is quite a legal process behind something like a corridor. There was a question on the elections and our position on political parties and the reform agenda and what should come first. So we are obviously supporting the Election Commission on the technical side. but and I use that word very specifically because it's technical support based on a formal request from the government. The United Nations is here to support participatory, credible elections, but we do not have a role in deciding when elections will be held, and we don't have a political opinion on what should come first. So that really is for the people, the government, the political parties of Bangladesh to decide. So happy to support on reform efforts if requested. We're also happy to support on supporting the Election Commission, but there's no position in terms of any of the political dynamics in country. For OHCHR's report, the recommendations are quite clear. A lot of the recommendations that came out of the report are being looked at, I understand, by the interim government. And if and when some of those recommendations are implemented, we again are ready to support technically. Additional information that is queried from the government through any of the legal processes will go to OHCHR, and that's something that I believe is with the justice system and OHCHR, and I can't comment further on that. But I know that if information is available, I'm sure there can be some agreement reached, but beyond that, I don't have any comment on that. And how long will we be here to support the government? I think the UN and Bangladesh has always been here to support the people of Bangladesh. We've been here for 50 years. We will continue to stay to support the flooding, the climate crisis, the sustainable development of this country, and to support Bangladesh and hosting 1 million refugees. So I think, I don't know, beyond that, I think we're here, we're committed to stay here for as long as we're needed. On the peacekeeping question, I'm not sure I fully understood. But first of all, just to say that Bangladesh's contribution to peacekeeping is incredibly valued by peacekeeping operations, and I think that's been said by the Secretary General, but also the Under Secretary General was here recently, because the forces and the peacekeepers are incredibly good at what they do, and they've proven themselves over the many years in terms of their contribution, but also their humanity and their ability to work with local communities to address very complex situations. So I think just to emphasize, Bangladesh's support is really important. But obviously, like with every troop contributing country, we encourage countries to put in place a human rights screening mechanism to make sure the peacekeepers and whoever are deployed meet the standards that's expected of UN staff. So that's something that we've encouraged the government in Bangladesh and the peacekeeping units that are deployed to really make sure that that screening is robust, because it is important not only to make sure the work that we are doing is done in the right way, but also to maintain the very good reputation that Bangladesh has across the world. So maybe, I don't know if that answers your question, but in terms of the ongoing support, we believe and hope that will continue. In terms of the situation inside Myanmar, obviously Rakhine is very difficult to access. It's very volatile. And the conflict is ongoing. There was a memorandum of understanding between the government de facto authorities in Myanmar and UNDP and UNHCR in terms of providing support. And so that MOU and that work is ongoing. But the presence of the UN has reduced significantly. But having said that, we do have some colleagues still on the ground, and we have a number of partners that are still working on the ground to provide assistance. But it is very challenging, both in terms of accessing some of the areas, and it's also challenging because the Myanmar funding situation, very like the funding situation for the Rohingya, is very, very challenging. And you know that the country experienced an earthquake, so there's a lot of needs in addition to the conflict-impacted communities. So efforts continue, but it is difficult. On the Rohingya situation, I appreciate we're in the eighth year of the response. I think what we all want, including the Rohingya themselves, is safe, dignified repatriation to Rakhine and to their homeland. But the situation is very difficult and remains very challenging. So in the meantime, we hope to maintain the support to the community here, which is our top priority. Continue to support the government in their management of the population and the community, and try and find avenues for political solution, because at the end of the day, this isn't a humanitarian situation that we can fix with humanitarian financing. It really requires a political solution with the parties to the conflict, and that's really where I think we're looking to our special envoy, Ms. Julie Bishop, who's really working on the political side, and to ASEAN and her call to those countries to help move forward on a political solution to what is now a very long conflict, and to support then the people for the longer term hope that they have to go home.
Mr. Murshid Hasib from Channel 24.
I'm not sure I want his question.
Another part of the question is on humanitarian. It appears that Bangladesh would invite more travel, press travel.
With the humanitarian court.
Sovereignty, if it allows humanitarian passage to Rakhine.
So as I mentioned at the beginning, any humanitarian corridor requires sovereign agreements between Bangladesh and Myanmar to avoid any trouble. So, and that conversation and that agreement, I don't believe, has been reached yet. So it really requires Bangladesh's government, Myanmar, any armed groups that are involved to agree on a corridor. It's a legal issue, and so that is what's really important to emphasize, and that's why member states need to decide. It's not a UN decision to put in place a UN humanitarian corridor.
You don't need microphone.
No, yes.
He doesn't need. I don't know if he needs a question. Does he need a question? It wasn't a report. There was a map that was published that didn't have the numbers of new arrivals included on the map. And the reason the number of new arrivals was not included was because the government of Bangladesh had not yet given the green light on the numbers. So the map didn't include it. And so the government asked me to include the numbers. So first of all, just to say, the UN in Myanmar is the UN in Myanmar. This is the UN in Bangladesh. So they don't have at their fingertips maybe all of the updated information. But once we shared it with the number with them, and we had approval from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they updated the map. So that map is now available online. You can have a look at it. It includes the number of new arrivals from Bangladesh. So that was the concern of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that it didn't fully reflect all of the information. But the UN didn't provide the information on the map because it hadn't been approved as yet by the government. So, so it was just a time lag between when the map was published. So I don't believe it was a controversy. I think it was more of a communication issue. And I think we have a strong and trusted relationship between the government and the UN. And, things happen every day when you're managing a community of over 1 million people, and it's very challenging. But I think on a day-to-day basis, we work together, we resolve issues, and I think it's a very robust and strong relationship. Morshed's question on the OHCHR report. So there were formal requests given to all parties for information. I think the vast majority of the information that was available at the time was provided. But the team were here for only several weeks, so not every single piece of information or every event that happened between July and August was recorded. All of the information that is in the report was triangulated, meaning they've double, triple-checked and cross-checked and used forensic evidence and made sure that all of the information in the report is robust. So regardless of maybe gaps in certain information from certain parties, everything that in the report OHCHR stands behind. And I think that's what's important. Additional information has come to light. Additional information will continue to come to light as the situation evolves, but it hasn't impacted any of the information or made, there are more incidents that happened, and at no moment did OHCHR say this report was comprehensive. It was just a snapshot in a very time-bound way to provide a picture and some key recommendations on what. I think what is really important about the OHCHR report is that the recommendations are really to prevent a situation like July and August happening again. It really focuses on institutional frameworks and makes recommendations to prevent. It is not, there are criminal processes and tribunals going on, commissions that really are looking at the justice side. But that report was really thinking through how can we put in place a system within Bangladesh's institutions so we never see a repeat. And I think that's really the spirit of the report. And I don't think that has any way changed from when it was published. You asked me what I would do. I feel quite Bangladeshi. It's my fourth year here. But really, honestly, I think it's very much a conversation that needs to happen within the government, with the political party. I have to say I'm quite impressed by the Consensus Commission. The fact that all of the parties are coming together and there's a robust dialogue. And these are very complex questions, some of them, and what we're actually seeing is a lot of agreement on most of the recommendations. So from my perspective, I think that process is very robust, and the interim government is leading that process well. And again, I think working towards credible, peaceful elections is something that we will support. But the date, the sequencing, I don't have any further comment on. And on there was another question around the Rohingya. Yes, when the Secretary General was here, there was a lot of discussion around how we can improve the political dialogue so that we can find a solution. And it was really a message of hope. And I think 8 years into a crisis, it's very important that we maintain that message of hope and we continue to work on the political process. And I think that is a message that the Secretary General and Professor Yunus really wanted to pass. Despite the complexity, despite the challenges, despite the very difficult funding situation, we will continue to work and push for the dignity and the rights of a very vulnerable community to be respected. The conference will be held on the 30th of September, and we hope that will be another opportunity to highlight the plight not only of the Rohingya but the other minority groups in Rakhine, and the government of Bangladesh has been instrumental in making that conference happen. So I think the leadership, the vision is very much there. I don't know about the timing and the dates. I think, this is a very politically challenging and complex situation. But I really appreciated Professor Yunus's vision and, again, his message of hope to the community.
Okay.
Yeah.
You are not satisfied with the answer?
Okay. Around clarification on the Reform Commission. So just to clarify again, the UN support to the Reform Commissions was very much when the commissions were looking technically at what recommendations they wanted to put forward. Right now, all of those recommendations are with the Consensus Committee and Commission, and they're part of a process where everybody needs to agree on what recommendations will be taken forward and what reforms are needed for the country. During this process, we're not part of that process. The UN isn't working on it. But when the recommendations were being developed, we shared good practices from other countries. We shared technical advice, for example, to the Election Commission. We brought in some experts on human rights to discuss with the Police Reform Commission. We gave good practices from other countries to the Anti-Corruption Commission. So each of the commissions had different questions and needed examples from other country or best practices. So we assisted them in that process. And then based on what decisions they made, they came up with their own recommendations. So right now we're not working on reforms. Or recommendations. We will wait the final decision of the process between political parties and government. And when that process is finalized, if there's a request, we will obviously support the government on the implementation. I think I've answered the corridor question twice already. It's the same answer, so I can answer it again. So the corridor, I don't know where the humanitarian corridor terminology came from, but it would require an agreement between Myanmar and Bangladesh, and including with the armed groups, to provide security if something like that was agreed. As far as I know, there has been no agreement yet between Myanmar and Bangladesh, and to provide support through a humanitarian corridor. There is assistance going in through different routes into Myanmar. I don't have the full picture, so that support is ongoing, and we will continue working on that. In terms of the level of aid in the Rohingya camps, as I've said, we have a huge funding shortfall. It's really dramatic. So what we're doing is trying to prioritize the most urgent needs of the community, and we'll continue to work with the government and our donors to provide that basic support. I am not going to comment on the political positioning of Awami League or BNP. The UN is not involved in politics. That's really a question you should ask the government and the political parties. And the push-in question, again, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been very clear about their concerns, and the advisor has raised those concerns. Mr. Hussein, I think his position is clear. I don't know. From the UN's perspective, it's concerning that the most vulnerable Rohingya are being pushed across borders. We obviously are trying to provide support to those families, but I think it's much more the government of Bangladesh that needs to address this issue.
Just I would like to clarify one thing from four more questions. The question was about Awami League. From the fact-finding mission report, it's very much, broad and acceptable all over the world. And in that report, you suggest not to ban any political party, and Professor Yunus said several times that he had no plan to ban any political party, but finally, Awami League has been banned. So what's your take on this, as you suggest not to ban any political party?
So again, this is not a question for me, it's a question for the government. So we made our recommendations because participation and inclusion of all political parties is something that prevents very polarized positions and potentially unrest. But I think the circumstances need to be looked at, and the decision of the government needs to be looked at in the context of the country. And I don't have anything more to say than that. It's very much a political decision, again, a decision of the government. On the last question, thanks for the question on the truth and healing process. There is a lot of talk at the moment around truth and reconciliation, and there's been different positions put forward. But from a technical, professional advisory that we have received is that truth and a healing process in every country following conflict or like the events over July, August need to be based on what the people of the country want. And there really needs to be a national consultation before any decisions on what type of process is needed. So you cannot compare Bangladesh to South Africa or to another country where there has been a long-term conflict and then try and mirror exactly the society, because it's a totally different context, a totally different set of events. So our advice on truth and healing would be a very strong national consultation with the people of Bangladesh to hear their voices, their thoughts on how they see the future, and on that base develop and put in place a procedure, a commission, a process. But until that consultation with people in the country is finalized, it's very difficult to see what path could be taken. One thing that we did learn when our colleagues who've been working on transitional justice came is that nobody was very comfortable with the word reconciliation because it doesn't work in Bangla. So it was felt that truth and healing were much more appropriate words in the language, but also from the sense of where people were and their understanding of the issues. So I think there needs to be a lot more conversations. That's very superficial, but there needs to be a lot more conversations about how to heal from what happened over July and August and other issues that the country has experienced over the many years. On the question on the OHCHR MOU, we understand from the government that it's finalized and we're waiting for signature, we hope very soon, and that means we will be able to open formally an office, a small office in Bangladesh to support a lot of the processes that are underway. And then there was question about whether the humanitarian corridor should be a road or a port. Again, I don't have an opinion on that because that would require the two countries to agree. Honestly, I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the discussion, I'm not privy to these discussions, so I think that's something that the governments are discussing. I don't know. So I can't comment on something I don't know anything about. Sorry. What was the other question? Yeah. So I can't speak on the expectations of the international community. I mean, I work for the UN, so I work for the UN. So I think just the national budget was presented on Monday, and it's extraordinary the measures that have been taken on economic stability in this country. I think you have a budget now that doesn't meet all of the needs and has been heavily criticized by some parties, but I think it's a budget that's realistic, that reflects true growth numbers, that is solid and robust. You have a banking system that's being reformed. There is quite a lot of progress on justice reform and the judiciary. So there's been a lot of really positive work. We're doing some really good work with the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment, with the Ministry of Fisheries, with the Ministry of Women Affairs. So there's a lot of positive work. Does more need to be done? Absolutely. In terms of expectations, I think the hope is more that there's a consensus, that agreement can be reached, and there's clarity in terms of the direction of the country, and then we're ready to stand and support those reforms and those decisions when they're made. That's a good way to end, no?
Thank you.